Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Knockout Podcast, episode 55. It's been quite the 24 hours, as we were discussing off air, not to do with MMA, but for sort of one day only. Note this day, the 19th of April, 2021. MMA is not the stupidest sport. Not the most confusing, lacking in leadership, lacking in any common sense sport in the world. Football for a day has overtaken it. So, with that in mind, we can really cherish this day. Although we are going to discuss Ben Askren versus Jake Paul, which would perhaps slightly contradict that. For one day, we can celebrate that. I'm Ben, as ever. I'm joined by Jack. Jack, how are you doing on this momentous day?
Yeah, I'm doing pretty good. As I said off there, I'm not a big football fan. I'm not that bothered by it, so I can for once sit as a outside observer and just kind of enjoy the madness, and that's quite fun. So yeah, I'm doing okay, to be honest.
Fantastic. Well, there's not a whole lot to discuss from last week. Perhaps the bar the main event. The second most interesting fight was the co-main event, and that was ended before it even started with a push causing concussion at the weigh-in, which is certainly a first. But I mean, if it was going to be anyone, it would be Jeremy Stephens. So we'll briefly touch over UFC Vegas 24, and mainly just talk about Rob Whittaker because he's just very good.
He is my boy.
He is. He really
He's
is
a legend.
And then we'll look to 261, to UFC 261, which as a five fight main card with 3 title fights, promises to be quite nice. But we'll start with UFC Vegas 24 now. I mean, I'm not sure why they don't change the name, but we're just racking up these UFC Vegases. We may as well start with that main event. Rob Whittaker, Kelvin Gastelum, 50-45 all round. I mean, a clinic springs to mind. That is the word. It was just, to his defense, Gastelum put on a good fight, coming in on only sort of 2-3 weeks notice, but it was just a clinic from Whittaker, who surely now has earned that rematch against Adesanya.
Yeah, I think clinic really is it really is the word for it, to be honest. Whittaker put on a fantastic performance in all facets of the game, really. He really cleanly outboxed Gastelum, really cleanly out wrestled him. Didn't do too much damage on the ground, but did take his back towards I think that was in the 5th round, wasn't it? Really just beat him in every single phase of the game and showed that just all across the board, he's a better fighter than Kelvin Gastelum. Which is a bit disappointing that he didn't then get to fight him and show that as a title defense when he got the hernia and had to pull out. That's very disappointing. But nice that he's able to do that now. So yeah, I thought Whittaker put on a fantastic performance. Gastelum came in looking to kind of pressure him heavily, but Whittaker moved around the outside. And I thought what he did an excellent job of was really countering Gastelum's entries as he tried to come in. You'd see so many times that Gastelum really just couldn't start anything. He couldn't start a combination because as soon as he did, he'd eat a jab or a left hook. And it was just essentially like that all night. And then Whittaker would then use that to kind of change the directionality of the fight and then land his favorite combo, the 1-2 head kick.
Oh, that is my favorite combo in the entire of the UFC or entire mixed martial arts. Just and only when Rob Whittaker does it, because I think he's really the only one who's got it nailed.
He really is, yeah.
And it's I know that every fighter going in must know. Do not, roll away or what do they call it? Do not sort of move out. Yeah, slip out to the right hand side. Everyone does it. Everyone slips into that kick. They just cannot avoid it. It's just magical.
That is the way. I think I talked about it last time when we talked about the Cannonier fight, and that's because Whittaker does a good job of setting up his weapons in that combination in turn. He will at first establish the threat of just the jab, and then he'll add the straight onto it. So he threatens you with just those 2 basic weapons to start with. And then when he gauges your defensive reactions to those, which generally is going to be to slip it, he will then add the head kick onto that. Because like you've got two options, like with the jab, you can either slip one of two ways or you can parry, I suppose. But if you're slipping one of two ways, if you're slipping not to your left, as in you're not slipping into the head kick direction, that puts you more out of position for the right hand. So you've kind of got to go the other way to have a better chance of not being out of position and like kind of, especially against southpaws, like if you slip the other way against the southpaw, you're kind of like off balance over your lead leg, and then you really don't want to eat the right hand then. But then you're going into the head kick side. So he does a really good job of that, I think, which what makes it so dangerous. I think like, and it's just obviously the way he throws it as well. He can just throw it kind of so like non-committal, not non-committally. He threw the lead leg head kick actually quite non-committally, which was nice in this fight once. But he throws it like a straight. It's like everyone else when they throw head kicks, they really have to put something into it. Like you saw Arnold Allen last week when he threw the head kick. Like he threw it a couple of times, fell over after each time because it's difficult to get to your opponent's head. But Whittaker, with great hip flexibility and dexterity, as well as Gastelum being shorter, can just throw it up like it's nothing.
Yeah, I know what you mean, and it's that combination of it being thrown so effortlessly, but it landing so sweetly that it still has so much impact.
Yeah,
like when he throws it, as you say, he's not throwing it like Alan throwed his one against Yusuf, which is thrown with so much force that if it lands, you know, it's going to do damage. But also, if it doesn't, or even if it does, he's going to throw him out of position. Also, Whittaker's is just thrown so effortlessly that it lands well because it's timed, and also means if it doesn't land, he's back in position and ready to, you know, face the counter if it comes.
Yeah, it is the more like karate style that he develops his whole kind of style off of, the much quicker kind of like snapping kicks as opposed to the tie kicks where you really turn and put your hip into it. So yeah, that's great. Gastelum did, to be fair, I think one thing Whittaker did in this fight, he threw it, to be honest, probably the most readily he's ever thrown that combination. I think a few times he's kind of smothered his own work in the sense that he threw it from slightly too close a range, I think, and it didn't kind of like quite have the same effect. And also I think Gastelum, I mean, over 5 rounds, if you eat it 10 times, as Gastelum did, you start to kind of get a read on it. And Gastelum towards the end of the fight, I think, was mostly catching it on his arms, to be honest. Although that's not fun for your arms either. But yeah, so yeah, that was fantastic. But then like Gastelum was kind of quite limited in his entries. I think he's never really developed much past a 1-2 and hasn't really learnt to kind of disguise it well with feints, which was why Whittaker was able to kind of so consistently counter him when he came in. And Gastelum really just had nothing to change the kind of like face of the fight. He tried his wrestling a few times, which, as we said, was absolutely useless. It's Robert Whittaker. So yeah, Gastelum just didn't have the tools to really make it the fight that he needed to.
Yeah, I mean, it was a good effort. I'm not sure.
Anyways. Oh yeah, like genuinely, he has a fantastic chin. That it was insane. The beating he took, and he still he hit Whittaker. Like he clapped back a few times. Whittaker wasn't looking like fresh faced at the end of it, so you know he got his licks in, but still pretty much a masterclass by Whittaker.
No, Whittaker is just that cut above. I mean, I think another thing I know you mentioned it. Was the wrestling, not only the anti-wrestling, but the actual initiation of the wrestling himself. I think it's something we saw in the Cannonier fight, and I think in the Till fight.
The Till fight, yeah.
But certainly, actually, yeah. If I'm looking down, actually, it says he didn't get any takedowns against Cannonier, but I think maybe he might have dropped Cannonier with a kick.
Yeah, he dropped him and then took his back after that, I think.
But yeah, if I look back through his things on UFC stats, you know, his takedowns against Darren Till was his first takedown since his fight against Uriah Hall in 2015. So there has been, certainly in his last sort of 2 to 3 fights, that the emphasis to bring in the wrestling, not only as a purely offensive maneuver, but also as something that he can then land kicks and strikes off.
Doing doing his Frankie Edgar impression.
Exactly. And if
grab
we're
the leg, punch off of it. Yeah.
if we're looking to Adesanya, which I think now we have to. I mean, I cannot see any world in which Marvin Vettori gets that over him. And I hope there is not a world where that happens. And I hope that world is not this world. But Adesanya, you will think will come back down. And that seems like the obvious fight. We obviously saw in his last fight against Blachowicz, although I think that's slightly different because Blachowicz is just ginormous. And I think a lot of the wrestling was just, especially once he got him down, keeping him down was just because of the size. But there is something to be said that in the open, Adesanya did show a weakness to being taken down. And if we're talking in a rematch, obviously the reckless charging in that we saw from Whittaker in the first fight would probably not be advisable. And I'm sure he recognizes that. But this more sort of patient hybrid fighter that Whittaker's become is certainly going to aid him exponentially in a likely rematch against Adesanya.
Yeah, as you said, it has to be the next fight at middleweight. There just simply isn't no other fight to make. And I am very interested in it. I think that I'd still favour Adesanya, but Rob can definitely do, like, as you said, if he's far more kind of like patient and really kind of sits behind his jab a bit more, doesn't charge in and try and like take his head off with every swing, which he kind of was a little bit in the first fight, goes to the body a bit more, and then obviously like body strikes, particularly a body jab, looks a little bit like a shot, so you can feint those into each other as well. So a good body attack mixed in with a wrestling threat, I think will do really good for Rob in the rematch. And yeah, I think that Blachowicz was able to hold Adesanya down in large part because of the size. I think Whittaker will have to, he won't have as much success holding him down, but just kind of like the threat, being able to mix it up and get him down puts Adesanya off his game and can open up avenues on the feet as well. So yeah, I'm very interested in the rematch and would love it if Rob could pull it off, to be honest.
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, I don't know what the schedule's looking like. I'm sure it's dependent on how much damage Rob sustained. I also don't know what sort of crowds and elite sport is looking like in New Zealand or Australia, but you've got to imagine there's got to be a desire to have that one down under again. I mean, if not in America, where sort of for better or for worse, there does seem to be a return of fans. I think actually fans are coming back for this one, aren't they, at the weekend?
Actually, yeah, I think it is actually. It might be.
So we will see. But I mean, I'd love that one to be down in America or Australia or New Zealand, but we don't know.
I think it might be the next pay-per-view actually that they've got fans.
Maybe.
I think it's the one in Texas is where they have the fans, and this.
Okay. Yeah, because they said they were bringing fans back for McGregor Poirier, which has now been confirmed for 264, and that's in Vegas. So, but yeah, we'll see. But that, I mean, that seems like the only fight to be made at the top of the middleweight division. Elsewhere on this card, there really isn't a whole lot to talk about. I mean, Arlovsky Chase Sherman as a co-main event basically tells you all you need to know about the quality of this card. Luis Pena, Alexander Munoz, I caught, and we've never been particularly high on Luis Pena, and the UFC have been very keen to push him, and he still sort of walks around in the ring with this sort of swagger of someone who seems like they're doing well in fight when he clearly wasn't. I think he was extremely lucky to walk away with this one. I think he probably lost it 29-28, but he got the split decision. And he sort of still flatters to deceive. Romanov Espino was funny just because it's the heavyweights, and as I was explaining to Jack, a groin strike at the start of the third round basically ended the fight. And that was pretty funny. And Joe Mearshart got a good win over Fabinski, which is nice after he got blasted by Khamzat Chimaev all those months ago. But
yeah, I did see the submission on that, and that was actually really nice.
Yeah, it was.
So that was cool.
But yeah, no, I mean, a good main event, if nothing else. I mean, probably part of the reason why they did phone it in, if you like, with this card was and in fact move the card forward was because of and it pains me to say it, the main event, the main attraction of the week for combat sports was Ben Askren versus Jake Paul. I mean, we talked about this very briefly when it was announced, I think, and we basically said if you were going to pick someone from the combat world who had the worst striking, it would be Ben Askren, coming off a double hit replacement. Just made that even more of an easy target for Jake Paul. I mean, he got the win with the first punch, the first like power punch that he threw basically and landed. I mean, quite a comedic stoppage to the fight where as I was saying to Jack, I basically don't think Ben Askren knew the sort of ins and outs of the boxing stoppage rules and what he had to do to keep the fight going. But regardless of that, I think the fight was basically going only one way. I mean, bizarre, but I guess a good bit of entertainment, and I guess at least we were vindicated in our prediction.
Yeah, it's actually one thing that I'd touch upon is obviously like people are very kind of dismissive of Jake Paul, like as this YouTuber that like wants to come into boxing or whatever. But I think that he can go fairly far because of like certain advantages that he has, particularly the fact that he's very early on in his career, but he's already got all the kind of resources that an elite boxer would have. He's got like a fairly like high level camp behind him. He trains like an elite fighter. He eats like an elite fighter. He's got that in place from the start of his career because of the resource, the money that he has essentially. And no other boxers have that luxury really. Being this early in their career, they don't have that. They have to focus on, generally they'll have another job maybe outside, obviously when they're amateurs. They have other things to focus on, whereas Paul has the luxury of being able to solely focus on this. So if he's dedicated, he can actually go, and he's a decent enough athlete that he can go like fairly far. It's very easy to kind of like dismiss him, but I think that with the kind of resources that he has, he's not someone like he's not to be dismissed that easily. The only thing would be, I don't know how he'd bounce back from a loss. He seems like the type of person that one loss would really crush him, to be honest. So like if he takes a fight too soon for him and he loses that, maybe then that stops him in his tracks. But outside of that, if he continues to manage to be able to develop with time and get kind of like these freak fights in, I don't really know how far he can go, but certainly decent enough, to be honest.
Yeah, it's a weird one because, as you say, he has got that. He has also, along with that sort of camp, he has got a bit of talent. There is a bit of, yeah. I think he's shown in those last two fights. He was fighting sort of athletes, and he did show that he was the better technical boxer, which I know isn't something when you're fighting, Ben Askren and a former NBA star, but that was sort of how it ended up being. My only thing is that if he wants to take this properly seriously, is if he's I don't know what level he could reach, but if he ever wanted to go sort of down the traditional boxing route rather than these sort of like celebrity or sort of bizarre matchups, he is eventually going to have to probably fight someone for less money, who is sort of a young guy who will have a lot of motivation coming in. And I think probably for him, he's probably just fine just having these sort of bizarre sort of circus. I mean, not circus fights. I think that's a bit unfair. But these match up against sort of like ex-fighters or celebrities or sports stars, because what the Tyson Jones one, which he co-main evented, was 2.5 million buys. This one I think was like 1.2 million pay-per-view buys. It's bringing in crazy money for him, and particularly low risk. I think there's been some talk about him fighting Tommy Fury next, who's I think 4-0 or something, and is obviously Tyson Fury's younger brother, or like stepbrother, I think. But who knows? I imagine he'll just keep going down this sort of like sort of semi-serious celeb / sort of famous people matchups, but it's bringing eyes to the sport at least, and a bit of light entertainment when often sort of boxing can be sort of rather serious.
I think he'll do that for a while. I think the celebrity, he's got probably another year or two probably of these celebrity fights, but after that, I think that he probably does want to actually go and try against like an actual serious boxer when he's got kind of like, when he's had a few more years of development. He's got like obviously he's not fighting particularly good fighters, but just for the experience of getting used to kind of like doing a weight cut. I suppose, although I don't know how much weight he's cutting, but like doing a weight cut, going through a training camp, putting up kind of like with the nerves and the pressure of the performance, and then actually going out and fully trying to knock an opponent out, like building up that experience as well as having like the resources behind him. I think he can develop quite quickly doing that. And I think after a certain point, he will want to go and actually test himself, to be honest. So it'll be interesting.
We will see. But I mean, I just looked up there. He's only 24, so there's certainly, as you say, he's sort of very early on, so there's no need to rush that. But yeah, we'll see. It certainly does look like he's in it for up until at least he loses a fight. But we'll see what happens.
I've seen that he said something about like wanting to fight Dustin Poirier, and I think I'd quite enjoy that because I think that would be quite funny.
No, I as we said, my theory was that, or not my theory, my hope was that we had he beats Ben Askren and then calls out Jorge Masvidal, and then Jorge Masvidal comes in and just pieces him up. But unfortunately, in fighting Ben Askren, he sort of befriended Jorge Masvidal, which is unfortunate. So that my sort of narrative arc did not come to fruition. But hopefully, he'll eventually pick someone way above his station and get put in his place. But that has certainly yet to come, and certainly was not going to happen against Ben Askren.
Never really was.
But I mean, fair play to Ben Askren, because he comes in there, he gets $500,000, $1 million, dollars rather, exactly. whatever. He doesn't seem to be a guy that's particularly worried about getting memed. I mean, his name and his brand has already been memed to hell and back with that Jorge Masvidal knockout. So yeah. It's an easy payday for him. It was, 3 minutes, and he basically got, $1 million. So happy days for him.
I mean, yeah, I'd take that, to be honest. So you can't blame him for that.
Exactly. But yeah, that's about all that needs to be said on that. And I guess to finish the show, we should probably look to 261 happening at the weekend, which is actually, as I mentioned at the top, has got 3 title fights and a couple of other interesting ones on the card. Where do you want to start? Do you want to start with one title fights, or should we work our way up?
Just start from the top. Start with Usman Masvidal.
Oh right, well yeah, I said Kamaru Usman, Jorge Masvidal 2, I should say. Usman coming in off that victory, very impressive victory against Gilbert Burns, which was only in February, so a pretty sharpish turnaround for Usman, and Jorge Masvidal, whose last fight was the loss to Kamaru Usman at UFC 251 back in July. That was a week's notice, which has obviously been built up quite a lot in the sort of pre-fight talk. This is the actual fight we would have got the first time round. I don't know. Obviously going in, the cardio is certainly an issue that you hope would be resolved. I think obviously the weight cut will not be as draining and as difficult as it was the first time round, being, that it was only done sort of rushed on 1 week. But, as Masvidal said, leading up to that fight, he had prepared months in advance for this fight. He thought he was going to get this fight, and it was then passed up, and it was given to Gilbert Burns, or it was, I think it was given to Gilbert Burns, and then he got COVID positive. So, the idea that Masvidal was going into this fight completely blind, and he was, who's coming in on 7 days, I can understand to an extent, but also he was training for Usman, and in those first couple of rounds when he might have had a chance and he, his gas tank could have stood up, he didn't show to me any discernible signs that him on a full training camp is going to do anything better, especially when you then par that with an Usman who in the fight since has shown an exponential improvement in many other areas of his game.
Yeah. The kind of narrative that it was so short notice, he wasn't prepared for Usman at all, is a completely false narrative spun by Masvidal that worked because he's got himself the rematch based on nothing. So you can't argue with it, I suppose. But yeah, like Masvidal just looked to not have the right ideas really to be able to deal with Usman, which is kind of like if you want someone coming in on a training camp or like with no training camp, you want them to have at least some of the right ideas. They just can't fully execute on it. But he didn't really seem to have any of the right ideas, so there's not that much to build on necessarily. So that would be kind of concerning from me. And I just think that, like, rewatching the kind of first fight, he just so readily kind of backed himself up to the fence, and then at other points where he wasn't on the fence, he'd really was really kind of trying to recreate the Darren Till knockout with the kind of like weird stutter step switch hit thing. And that allowed Usman to fairly frequently kind of just turn him. So like if he was pressuring Usman and Usman's back was near the fence, he'd try that stutter step thing, and then Usman would just pivot, and then Masvidal was suddenly with his back to the fence. So he just had no real consistent ideas on how to really start to get anything going against Usman, and no real kind of like defensive kind of ability to stay off the fence and punish Usman for trying to like push in on him. One thing that would work quite well is something essentially similar to what Whittaker did against Gastelum, was like a real nice kind of like pivoting back foot jab would work very nicely, I think, for Masvidal, being able to like kind of punish Usman for trying to press in and then also being able to circle out as you jab. That would be something that Masvidal would need to add, I think, to improve his chances. But as soon as like his back's to the fence and he's like kind of in defensive wrestling mode, it's Usman's fight, and there's no reliable route to victory there for Masvidal.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree. It certainly appears to me to be quite an uphill battle. I mean, we've always said with Kamaru Usman that he is a fighter who is perhaps, for better or for worse, not obsessed with, flashy knockouts or certainly putting on an absolute barnstormer of a fight. He's done that against Covington, but his aim is to win the fight and win the fight by, as we always say, the path of least resistance. And I think in the last fight against Masvidal, it was a grindy clinch work, takedown based performance. And although he's shown the improvements under Trevor Whitman with that jab, especially out of the southpaw stance against Gilbert Burns, and that could be something that he goes to more, and I expect him to go to it more. But I would not be surprised at all, and I would expect that we see him just trying to employ very much the same game plan that he did in that first fight, and that he's done in many of his fights, which is that, grindy clinch against the fence, get the takedown, ground and pound, because that is what he's so good at. And as you say, I can't see any way in which Masvidal is going to stop that, because he found himself against the cage, so often in that first fight, and that wasn't stamina related. That's just how he fights.
Yeah.
And unless he can do or has found a way to keep Usman, out of those positions, or keep himself out of those positions, then I think it's just going to be a rinse and repeat, really.
Yeah. I think that the stamina kind of issue is sort of interesting, but also sort of not, because like early on when Masvidal was fresh, Usman could still fairly reliably execute the kind of grindy game plan. He could get to that as consistently as he wanted to. The only thing that really changed when Masvidal got tired was that Usman started to outbox him, if anything. So that doesn't look good from kind of Masvidal's perspective. So hopefully maybe that will be fixed, and later on Masvidal can have a bit more of a chance. But also Usman has made improvements since that fight with his stand-up, so not necessarily. But one thing I think Usman does, or like goes in his favor, is that he's always the one kind of like making you come up with answers. Like whenever someone fights Kamaru Usman, it's always you look at their opponent and say, what can they do to kind of answer the questions that Usman asks? And I think that's like a good general position to be in as a fighter, is always making your opponent having to be the one to come up with something, as opposed to just being able to do their regular game. So I think that's like just kind of like from a overall like view of Usman, that's kind of one thing that he does quite well, or his game allows him to do, I suppose.
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, I think we've basically said what needs to be said there, but I think the percentage chance that Masvidal makes the necessary changes that he needs to do is particularly small.
Yeah,
and I can't see any reason why Usman, who has shown no tendency to sort of crack under the pressure, to deviate from a game plan, crucially, is gonna deviate from this game plan, which I'm sure him and Trevor Whitman have built, and I think I strongly favour him to come out with a unanimous decision, perhaps a sort of TKO late on, but yeah, we'll see. But I think I'd heavily favour Usman.
Same, I would as well.
Right, let's make our way down the card then. The first of two women's title fights. This one in the 115. Was it the 115 or the 10? Yeah, no, the 115. I always get those weights confused. The 115 strawweight division. Zhang Weili or Weili Zhang coming in for the first time in over a year. Probably stuff to do with China and quarantine, COVID, stuff like that. Yeah. But after her fight of the year / fight of the year contender, I don't know whether it was officially given it, but fantastic fight regardless against Joanna Jędrzejczyk, and Rose Namajunas coming in off her unanimous decision victory against Jessica Andrade, who now fights in the flyweight title fight, which we'll discuss in a bit. This is a fight that makes a whole lot of sense. Rose has obviously shown, she got that win against Jessica Andrade. She avenged that title defeat, and of course, what we can't ignore is she has got, coursing through her veins the power and the strength of capitalism to fight off the evil communist mouthpiece and figurehead that is Weili Zhang. So, I mean, other than that very obvious desire to smite the communist foe, how can you see this sort of fight playing out?
I don't have like a kind of detailed kind of read on it. The only kind of overall picture, if you want, very kind of broad, would be that early on I see it being fairly competitive, but Rose does kind of rely on very active footwork, and she has shown that even in a 3-round fight she can't really sustain it.
No, definitely.
So over 5 rounds I can see that Weili will definitely wear her down. I think she hits fairly hard. Zhang Weili, whatever. So I see that kind of over the course of the fight, I think that will really start to wear on Rose, and she won't be able to keep it up. And Weili might crack her. She might finish her. She might not. But that would be the very broad outline.
Yeah, I think definitely in that Jessica Andrade's second fight, there was quite an obvious decline in her stamina. I think she won it all 29-28. So certainly that is a worry. I think probably from a technical, I think Zhang Weili's technical boxing is probably slightly underestimated going into this fight. I think Rose probably has has that and will probably want to use that more. She'll probably want to keep the fight more at range, just sort of darting in, darting out. But the way rather her ability to do that for 5 rounds is going to be called into question, because Weili Zhang is just this sort of, plodding juggernaut that just, does not stop. We saw that for 25 minutes against Joanna. Joanna probably did sort of similar to what we might see from Rose, sort of looking to hop in, throw her combos and get out. But even then, Weili Zhang was capable not only to trade with Rose and do that effectively, but also implement some clinch game and perhaps ground stuff, and perhaps that is where we might see Weili Zhang do some of her best work is if she can sort of force Rose backwards, force her against the cage, and to initiate some of that clinch stuff, because I see her being certainly the much physically stronger fighter. I think most fighters against Rose probably are gonna have that advantage, but I think certainly if she can see off the discernible threat that Rose has early on with her striking, I think I can definitely see a world where, not quite like a Max Holloway where it grows into the fight, but where Weili Zhang just does take over in those later rounds due to sort of stamina, Rose's lack of stamina, and Weili Zhang's just sort of non-stop pressure that we've seen throughout quite a lot of her fights.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. One thing I think Rose can have success with is something Joanna did. Is that if she can, Joanna had a lot of success kicking against Weili. So if Rose can kind of build up a kind of kick heavy game plan and really kind of keep it on the outside and like use her jab and pivot with that as well, I think that early on she can get the better of it. And also Joanna had success going southpaw as well. I don't know if that's something that Rose can really do. I can't recall her ever really being going southpaw in the past. So it's not necessarily something that I know she can do, but something I suppose to think about if Rose suddenly has this kind of like new wrinkle to her game. It might be interesting. But yeah, I pretty much sign off on everything you said. That I see Zhang being the far more physical, athletic fighter and being able to kind of, especially over time, impose that on Rose.
Yeah, it'll be an interesting one, but we shall see. But yeah, I think we both probably expect Zhang to come on strong late and win this fight in whether that's by decision or perhaps a late stoppage. The last of the 3 title fights is the flyweights: Valentina Shevchenko, Jessica Andrade. Shevchenko, after her fight against Jennifer Maia, which she won, I think 49-46, something like that. It's pretty comfortable. And Jessica Andrade, in only her second UFC fight, at least at flyweight, she beat Caitlin Chikagian, and now comes in to fight the champion. I mean, it's probably one of the few compelling fights in the women's flyweight division at the minute. Jessica Andrade has certainly shown especially in that defeat to Rose and also in the Caitlin Chikagian fight, and there has been some improvements. The head movement's been a lot better and the footwork's been a lot better. She's probably got the strength, despite her the strength advantage rather, despite her small stature. But I don't want to sort of simplify this fight down to whether sort of Jessica Andrade can land that big shot, but I don't see any other way that she wins the fight. I don't see a world in which she outpoints Shevchenko. It's just whether she can land that big impact body shot or head shot or that big impact takedown. And I'm just not sure that Shevchenko is going to be the person that a game plan like that is going to work all too well against.
Yeah, I don't. Yeah, it is one of the more compelling fights of Valentina Shevchenko, but still not particularly compelling.
Yeah.
I think that in large part, this is going to look quite similar to Andrade's fight with Joanna. A lot of kind of Andrade pressing forward, and then Joanna just being able to kind of, or well, I suppose in this case, Valentina being able to just pick her off on the back foot. Shevchenko's one thing she actually does do really well. She gets a lot of possibly undue praise. People say she's one of the best strikers in the world, but whatever. One of the things she does do very well, better than a lot of people, is that she's a very good back foot kicker, which is very rare. She's able to generate a lot of power and consistently kick whilst going backwards. And I think that will be quite a big help for her in this fight, especially because Andrade will continuously press forward as long as she's able to, essentially. So yeah, I think Andrade with a kind of like sustained body attack could be interesting, but I generally see like she'll have a bit of trouble reaching Valentina. And Valentina's cagecraft is good enough to keep her off the fence. Generally, I think so. Not much of an avenue really for Andrade to kind of like get her kind of like cage wrestling going off of that either. So I don't really see that much of a chance for Andrade, but I think it will be one of the more interesting Shevchenko fights. I think Andrade would kind of like force that out of her, to be honest, more than anything.
Yeah, I would agree with you. I think, chances are she gets the job done. Well, Shevchenko that is, but there is a slight bit of intrigue. Not unlike the Maya Shevchenko one, where Maya sort of leaned on her against the cage in the second round. It got to 1-0 and everyone said, "Hello, look what's going on here. We can have an upset on our cards." I think the betting odds went from something from like I think she went to like plus like I don't know 7,000 to like plus like her odds halved in that round which she won. I was like, guys, what has she done here? All she done is lean on her for a round. So maybe we'll have Andrade will come out there, body slammer, take her down in the first round. Everyone's like, God, guys, we've got it here. The win's on the cards. She's gone. But
I'd quite like that. That would be quite.
I mean, I would love a fifth round sort of suplex KO from Jessica Andrade.
I'd love a fifth round after Valentina dominates the whole fight. A fifth round, Andrade like recreates the Rose knockout, because people lost their mind when Rose got knocked out like that. Like, oh, make this illegal. That shouldn't be allowed.
Do that.
You can't do that. And if she did that to Valentina, the fanboys would absolutely go wild and they would hate it. So I would love for that to happen, to be honest.
There you go. That is the official Knockout Podcast prediction. Put your money on that. Yeah, just remortgage the house, stick it on it, it will happen.
Fifth round slam KO.
Yeah, that's it. That's exactly it. Well, those are the three title fights. Elsewhere, making up the main card. At middleweight, we've got Uriah Hall, Chris Weidman, both coming off underwhelming. Is certainly the word. Uriah Hall getting a few rounds taken off him by Anderson Silva before he retired in 2020 is not a great look, but he did get the fourth round TKO eventually. And Chris Weidman with certainly an underwhelming and workmanlike victory against Amari Akhmedov in his return to middleweight. These guys are ranked sort of on the sort of fringes of the sort of top middleweight picture. I know, it'll be interesting to see what condition they both come in, but I don't come in with this one with a whole sense of excitement, but perhaps a bit of intrigue in terms of seeing how this one plays out.
Yeah, more than anything, to like probably see where Weidman is at. Like, it's been almost not quite a year since he last fought, and he didn't look great. But maybe like if he can had a bit of time out, kind of refresh himself a bit. He's got a win, importantly, kind of like back under his belt, and a win where he didn't get dropped, because the last win before that was the Gastelum one where he nearly got finished in the first round. So just kind of like being able to say like, right, I've still got the talent. I can still do this, to kind of like just kind of refresh himself mentally. I think that it'll be interesting to see where Weidman's at. And then Uriah Hall, I think that I don't know. I think Uriah Hall is kind of like, people were quite excited of him when coming up, but he's kind of like shown that really kind of where he is now, maybe slightly higher, is kind of the limit to where he's going to get. He's going to be a top 10 guy, like not quite making the top 5. And I don't really see him, unless he has like a kind of late career resurgence, pushing much past that. So I think it has potential to be an interesting fight. It also has potential to be a fairly dull fight, to be honest. So yeah, we'll see how it turns out, but not much to say, to be honest.
Yeah, I think I'm intrigued to see how Weidman's wrestling and certainly his cardio holds up, because that was certainly a problem that we saw in some of his other fights. I mean, he is 36 now, so interesting to see how he goes with that. But yeah, there's a bit of intrigue, and there's at least whoever wins this can begin to move up that middleweight division and perhaps put themselves in line for a fun fight up at the top of the division. Elsewhere, sort of concluding the main card. Is it a bird? Is it a plane? No, it's Jimmy Crute, an actually interesting light heavyweight fighter, which is a rarity, and he takes on Anthony Smith to conclude the main card. Jimmy Crute coming off the Modestus Bukauskas, the most British name ever, KO in the first round, and a victory over Michael, our favourite guy, Alexei Chuk, who I actually know how to pronounce because I watched his fight against Bukauskas, who Jimmy Crute most recently beat. I think Jimmy Crute's pretty fun, to be honest. Yeah. And he's coming in against Anthony Smith, who has been on a pretty poor performance. Well, I say pretty poor, an awful performance against Glover Teixeira, a pretty dull fight against Alexander Rakic, and then an early stoppage submission of Devin Clark. I think this is a really good opportunity for Jimmy Crute on quite a big stage against quite a high sort of profile opponent to get sort of that breakthrough win. His career, I wouldn't say stalled, but it took a minor sort of diversion after his sort of loss against Misha Serkinov. But this is the opportunity that he's been waiting for to get that big win and really put himself up amongst those top names up at 205.
Yeah, kind of. Smith did get that Devin Clark win, but other than that, Smith has kind of looked a bit of a shell of himself, to be honest, recently. Like he was okay early in the Teixeira fight, but really faded. And then the Rakic fight, from what I can remember, was just kind of nothing. Like he didn't really do anything and just kind of got controlled for the whole fight. So yeah, it is a good opportunity for Jimmy Crute because Smith is still ranked 6th in the rankings, which seems incredibly high for him right now. But I suppose that Glover Teixeira is probably going to get a title shot, and then Rakic is near that. So I suppose his 2 losses are against top contenders, which can't argue with that. But I think that kind of speaks to light heavyweight more than anything. So yeah, above all, it is a good opportunity for Jimmy Crute, and that's mostly what I'm excited about, to be honest.
Yeah, I think he's shown his strengths were sort of on the ground with his submission game. I think in the Bukauskas fight, he's shown he did make a lot of improvements to his stand-up game. I just think he'll have a bit too much for an Anthony Smith, who, as you say, has not even his best years, but he had a good run, beating up a few sort of old light heavyweights. Was then sort of heavily stopped in his tracks by John Jones, and I think Jimmy Crute will leap on Anthony Smith and the name and stature that he holds at 205 and hopefully get a good win.
Yeah.
Elsewhere on this card, Alex Oliveira fights Randy Brown, Dwight Grant, Carl Roberson, Brendan Allen could be fun. I've actually noticed on the early prelims, clearly, I don't know what the Chinese sort of protocol for allowing fighters to travel are, but clearly it's been weakened because there's a lot of Chinese influence on the early prelims. You've got I haven't heard of any of these, I must admit, Na Liang, Rong Zhu, and my favorite one, which I just looked up as you were speaking, Keeleng Aori, who is known as the Mongolian murderer, which sounds frightening, to be honest.
Yeah, it does.
So crikey, wouldn't want to stumble across him in some sort of Mongolian back alley. But yeah, that's at least some more sort of Chinese influence on the card, probably largely because Weili Zhang fights in the co-main. But that is probably going to draw this to a close, unless you have any sort of final remarks on the UFC 261 card.
No, nothing in particular to say, to be honest.
Lovely stuff. Well, we will be back hopefully same time next week to discuss everything that happened at 261. I think we've got next week we've got Yuri Prochazka versus Dominic Reyes, main eventing, which could be fun.
Loma Lookboonme's on that card.
I have just seen that.
And Giga Chikadze, Cub Swanson's a very fun fight, actually.
That is fun. Herbert Burns is back.
Gabriel Benitez is on the card. He's always fun.
But all the stars.
It's a decent card, to be fair.
Devashvili, Cody Stamen could be quite a fun one. There's a few talking points. So yeah, we'll be back early next week to talk 261 and to talk UFC Vegas 25. Crikey, that is getting lengthy at this point. But yeah, until then, stay safe, everyone, and we'll see you then.
See ya.